Oh my word, it is 2016 and we are live. Hey everybody, welcome to Community Manager Hangout, my community manager, community built by, for, and managed by other community managers. My name is Dom. Um, hey guys, we're back. It is 2016. I'm sure you guys, I hope you guys miss us as much as we missed you. Really stoked to be here with a great panel. And yeah, we're just gonna jump right in. We wanted to really set the stage this week and take a look at the potential scope of a community manager role, how to define the scope for a community manager role, how do you stay within the scope, when do you push beyond it, how do you advocate for yourself when people sort of come up on there, and try to scope creep, as you may call it. So all of those different things. So I'm going to throw it to the panel if you guys want to introduce yourself, and we'll be able to go from there.
Hi everyone, I'm Margot. I am the community manager at Wistia. We are a video hosting and analytics platform. And most of my role, what I like to call it, is just trying to connect folks with the resources that they need to succeed in their jobs.
Awesome. I'm Jen Lopez. I'm the Senior Director of Community at Moz. We make marketing software. And we have grown the team essentially from one person doing all of the things, that was me several years ago, to a large team of about 9 people, full-time, part-time, contractors, various things working. So I'm excited to talk about this topic.
Hi, I'm Emma Cunningham. I am a digital strategist at FCB in Toronto. Currently on maternity leave, so I don't have any brands at the moment. And I'm excited to be here today and have some adult conversations so my brain doesn't completely turn into a pile of goo. Hi, it's nice to be here.
Hey everyone, I am Sherry Reddy and I'm the community manager at Magento, as well as co-produce CMGR Hangout here with Dom and Brew. Oh, and special shout out to Emma because she's on maternity leave because she had a baby 3 days ago, so we all know her superpower for being on the Hangout today.
3 days ago. Super cute baby too. We got to take a look at it earlier, so you guys should all be jealous. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Kristen and Carrie, who are hanging out over on Twitter. I know you guys have been just dying to ask a questions, so make sure that you send those in during the show so we can try to get some of them in. But let's pick the brains of these incredibly smart people we have here and go question number 1. Who defines scope for a community role? Is it the employer, the employee, the industry? Why? What do you guys say?
I've personally found that industry is really huge in setting the scope for a community manager. My background was originally client-side, and I switched agency a couple of years ago, and I've noticed that what a client-side, like a company would define as their in-house community manager, has a really different scope from working with an agency. Usually in an agency, it's quite a junior role. It's primarily publishing content and responding to questions and comments by people in the community, more so than a lot of the outreach that I think makes the community manager job as fun as it can be. Whereas when you work for a company, you're private, you're in-house, there's the approval process is a lot quicker. There's a lot more ownership of the role, and people really are more empowered to go out and find people who haven't necessarily reached out to your brand first. So I've noticed that industry definitely has a huge impact in setting the scope, although obviously there's quite a lot of fluctuations from agency to agency or private company to private company.
I love the idea that the industry can actually help define those roles, because I do think that we still have new people coming in all the time, and we have organizations that are hiring their first community manager and they're like, what the hell is this? How do I figure this out? What am I doing? And so having an industry that's, that's getting so robust, and we have so much information, articles, lots of good information out there that's, giving us that, helping people who are sort of new to it understand it a bit more. I also think it has to do with not only in-house and agency, but also size, right? When we were a much smaller company and the community was smaller, it was easier for one person to do like a million things. And as it grows, obviously, you have to start divvying those up a little differently and determine who does what, how does it happen. Maybe this piece now it actually belongs to somebody else, to another team. So as the company grows, when you're internal, that can help distribute that quite a bit. I think normally the people doing the role seem to have a bit more information about what's happening than sometimes other people, right? So the question was like the employer. Oftentimes I've seen that the employer doesn't necessarily know. They're more like, we know we need this. We would like you to tell us what we need.
Yeah, that's kind of the worst when you go in for a job interview or something and they're like, we know we need a community manager. What do you do? Explain to me. Explain how this works. And sometimes that can work out really well for you in that you kind of get to set your own role and you get to put all the fun aspects of the career in there and really define what you want to be doing. But a lot of times that can be really disastrous as well. I know I've run into problems in jobs where they hired a brand new role. They knew they needed it, but they didn't realize that for every single piece of content that goes out on social media, 6 people had to approve it. And when you hire someone at a junior level who's not able to approve their own content, it gets really messy. So a lot of times, there's really advantages and disadvantages to a company that's hiring their first one and knows they need it, but don't really know how it's going to fit into the larger scope of their business.
So sort of playing off of that then, like where do you really start when you are defining a scope for a community role? Like if it sort of does fall into like the employer hasn't necessarily set it up and they're like sort of leaning on you to sort of help set that, where do you really start then?
I think it's really going to be different for different types of organizations. Some organizations, it may be already a bit defined. They may already have some aspect of community that they don't really necessarily call community, right? It could be that they already have a forum that they've had for years. It could just be social media. It could be a blog, that sort of thing. And so that I think first taking a look at what currently exists and what you're already doing, which I think it is a good place to start, as in like, okay, this is where we're at. Sometimes you start with nothing, right? You're like, okay, we know this is a thing that we want and we're going to start at this point. But first taking a look at just where you're at and maybe where your particular industry and business is within, the greater industry, I guess, of that is a good place to at least get started. At least start saying this is what we currently need, and then you can start looking at the future of what we want is this, and this is how we'll get there.
I think for me, since I'm currently in a strategist role, my starting point is to write a strategy. So this is our community strategy. These are the business objectives that we're looking to solve. This is how community can answer those business challenges. Here's where it's going to play into your goals on a macro scale and a micro scale, and then get into the tactics. Like, here are the places we plan to play. Here are some of the things that we're going to do. We're going to be answering people in this sort of a way. We're going to be doing this type of influencer outreach. This is how it's going to look. Here's the people that we can connect with when there are, questions that are outside our scope or things we don't know how to answer. I just lay everything out on paper and get everyone aligned to the plan of community before sort of handing it over to a community manager and saying, all right, here's what your scope for, go.
I know, too, when I was at my last job and we needed to really expand my role into multiple roles, one thing we looked at is what parts of my job were going to be really teachable for someone versus what parts were better for me to continue on the strategy for. And so that can sometimes help, too. But it's definitely important to be really clear with what your expectations are as early as in the job description so people know what they're getting into and what to expect.
Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing we've done here is I hire a slightly different. Like it's not necessarily we have this one particular role that needs to be filled, and we're trying to find a person to fit into doing all these things. What we've done is hire people who we know are right for our team for various ways, and then we've modified the specific tasks based around the team that we've built. So finding the right people who we know have the skills to do these various things, and then putting the individual skills with the person who's really good at that thing, or who's interested in learning that right now, or who, you know, who's, you know, who wants to go down a certain path, and then they take on those particular tasks, as opposed to it being like, we have this job and we need to find a person that can easily fit into all these things, because sometimes that can be, you know, in any role, it can be very difficult to find someone who fits, you know, checks all the boxes and does all the things, right?
I also think, like, as you hire people and they get really comfortable in their jobs, they'll have different strengths and weaknesses depending on what they do. And so I think it's important to, when you are hiring for a different community role, to just try and see like where people might want to be moved to a different section based on the strengths that they found, or stuff maybe that they don't like doing anymore. And then when you are able to hire someone who has the skill set that you need, you can say, well, you know, what are your strengths and what do you want to excel at in the future? And then kind of move things around there. I think that as you hire in an organization, it's important to not just be like stuck in that role, but rather just reassess every time and say, you know, which person has the strengths to make this part of the community even more like delightful and valuable to others.
Totally, I love that. We actually do every 6 months. We go through and look at all the things that we're working on and who's doing what, and we kind of throw them all into the bucket. And not as a random like, oh, you pick it out, but you know, if somebody has been managing a certain thing for a long time and they're kind of like, I would really like to move on to something else, we work on switching those roles around as needed, and we look at them every 6 months.
I think that's a really good habit to have, and you know, I liked what Emma was saying when she was talking about like sort of starting with the strategy, and the one thing I pulled out of there was like the business objectives and sort of like working backwards through those, like sort of figuring out, all right, so we need to accomplish, you know, A, B, C, D, and E, and then for each one of those, you're like, all right, so here are the steps that we need to do. And then even if it's something as simple as like, say you have like 2 or 3 people and you just start putting people's initials next to things, when you notice that like one person is like on a lot of stuff, then you go, all right, so what can we take off of their plate? And like what Sherry was saying, like the more teachable things, like what can we teach, you know, person 2 that person 1 can have taken off, so that they can really be able to thrive and, you know, work best. And you know, it's a delicate balance for sure, because you don't want to overwhelm one person, and you want to be able to make it so you can have people grow, and you know, as the scope of your business grows, you want the scope of people's responsibilities to be able to grow too. So let's move on to question 3. And by the way, if you guys are watching wherever you are, feel free to tweet any questions. You know, it could be personal, it could be like just little things that come up in between these. Just go ahead and send them in. And by personal, I don't mean like, you know, what our favorite color is. I mean like personal, like your specific work.
Hey, Dom, one quick
Yeah.
thing before we jump into the next question. Bruce says hi from his retirement condo in Florida, and that he loves you guys and feels like part of him is dead because it's been so long since he was here.
Yeah. If you guys haven't been following along with Brew, he's on Brewcation right now. Hasn't been working, hasn't been here, and he's getting some well-deserved family time. So we all love you, Brew. All right, but enough about him, because we're here now. All right, question number 3. What are some common elements in community roles? Sherry, can you sort of expand on question number 3? Like what you mean by the common elements? You just mean like common elements in the scope?
Yep.
Okay.
Like, what are things that commonly show up when you're looking at community roles? What tasks, what responsibilities, objectives, things like that?
So for me, I've always worked on the digital side of community, but I worked at a company a few years ago that also had a very robust in-person community as well. So I think when we talk about community manager these days, that's 90% of those jobs are social media now. But I think there are still quite a lot of companies that try to do in-person events, meetups, hangouts, and I think really the overall scope is always to make your customers and potential customers feel like your brand is for them. And that's usually done through, strong communications programs. It's usually done through one-to-one communications as well as mass. But the overall objective for community roles is always to make people feel like a brand fits in with them and their life, and to deepen that relationship, to increase sort of that feeling. Um, so it's answering customers. There's often a really high crossover with customer service teams. Um, and it's really, it's just to make sure that people feel that they're valued and that what they want out of life is in line with what the brand is offering.
I think that a big community role that I've found in the past is having folks advocate for their community members. And I think, just personally working for startups in the past, it can be difficult to get a feel on what folks want in your product or what they might have trouble with or how you can make it better. And I think a big part of the role is to really find out what your audience, what your users or members need, and how you can advocate for them on the product team. So that's been something that has been a part of all of my past community jobs for sure.
For us, I would say there are a couple things. Going back to the customer service aspect that Emma had mentioned, we have straight up stolen people off the customer service team, because they already know the products and the tools and the stuff in a way that someone brand new doesn't necessarily know. And having that knowledge, most of the people on our team have either come from inside the company somewhere else, usually from customer service, or they've come from the community themselves, because they already have an in-depth knowledge of how things work. Maybe they know the voice. Those are some of the hardest things, is knowing the voice. You can teach someone how to do certain tasks, right? It's not necessarily as easy to teach someone how to keep up with the brand voice and that sort of thing. I mean, when it comes to, so our community team, we do social, we have forums, we have in-person events, all of that stuff. Everyone gets trained to do all the different things, but then everybody has their specialty that they do more full-time. Having the ability to, finding the right people that can actually live by that voice, own those values that you may have as an organization, that it goes much more beyond just can they write tweets and can they respond to emails, right? It goes beyond that. It goes beyond to, some more of the softer skills. They also need to be able to handle things with grace, as opposed to constant freakouts. That's a big one. How do you handle this situation? And if the answer is well, I completely freak out and I run and stick my head in the sand, it's that might not work for us. But I think that's a big one.
That's the perfect time for a 20-minute in plug for the CMAT Awards. If you know somebody that does handle things with tact and grace, maybe they should be nominated for the Diplomat Award. And you can find those at cmad.co/awards. I love what you guys are talking about with voice. I think that voice is a huge thing when it comes to just having that skill, because a lot of times you're talking to somebody else. And I know Emma and I have had multiple conversations about this, about theater type training when you're working with community managers, the ability to essentially put yourself in somebody else's head. is, or put somebody else inside of your head, you know, is a great skill. You know, I think that for me at least, like when I started into a community role, like I think when you're starting on, like, you have the lower end of the scope, a lot of those raw skills with the things like being able to look and read situations, you know, handle things tactfully, the ability to know where you have to direct, because a lot of times you are directing traffic to other places, because most of the time you're like the front line for what stuff's going on. So, you know, those types of things, I think is a big skill that's really important to have. Do you guys have anything else? Any other skills?
Yeah,
No.
I think what you said about directing traffic is really important. I always look at community managers as really a dual role, almost like a bridge. So you spend about half your time advocating to consumers on behalf of the brand, and the other half of your time advocating to the brand on behalf of your consumers, and just making sure that you've really got both hats on. Um, you're really the only person at the company who's consistently speaking up with the consumer's voice, and then you kind of have to go back and respond. So I think it's really important to just make sure that you're sort of wearing both hats equally.
I think that boils down to really understanding your role also, right? And knowing what your goals and, you know, what you're supposed to really be doing. But and that goes back to the initial of like who figures that out and who lays those rules down and who says what you do and all that. But yeah, that's totally a part of knowing that role.
For sure. I apologize if someone already said this. I got distracted taking an Instagram picture of the Hangout. But one, just full transparency here. But one thing I think is really common no matter what area of community you're working in is you should always be looking for synergies where you can connect people with each other, where those relationships are going to make sense and be mutually beneficial, as well as be aware of any time that you can connect people to resources that are out there, whether they're from your company or whether they're from others in your community, but things that will help them succeed, because a lot of times what they're looking for already exists, but they might not necessarily know where to look for it because it isn't their full-time job to be aware of everything that's going on in the community.
Fantastic. Or I should say awesome, because there's, you know, a counter going somewhere. All right, before we go into question 4, I said the whole color thing, and Carrie said, damn it, she wants to know what everybody's favorite color is. So really quick, going down the line, starting with Sherry, what is your favorite color?
My favorite color is blue. Cerulean blue, to be specific.
All right. What you got, Margot?
I'm purple. Purple all day.
Purple. Jen?
I am red, like a dark, deep red. It's my favorite color.
Emma?
Green with purple in close second.
All right. My answer was the specific color of Patrick Hellen's eyes, which he then responded was dusky hazel, which also happens to be his stripper name. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's try to keep it on the rails as much as we can, seeing as how we only have 37 minutes left. Question number 4. This is actually a really good one. I'm excited to hear what you guys are thinking with this one. What should you look for when looking at a community job listing? So let's say you are a community manager that has #HireMe in their bio, and you're looking at all these listings. What are the things that you should be looking for?
I look to make sure that the things I like doing and that I excel at are in the job description. So I look for the seniority. If it's a straight up publishing and responding to user comments role, then that's probably not for me. So things that would tip me off that it's a good job are things like influencer marketing, community outreach, community strategy, things like that are good keywords. Title can play a part as well. The majority of roles are probably going to say community manager, but sometimes they'll say things like junior community manager, senior community manager, community lead, director of community. So those can also give you a sense of what type of authority you're going to have. And then I would probably be looking for something where I'd have some input on how that community strategy was going to look.
Yeah, I'd have to definitely agree with Emma. If seeing community strategy and like something like help us create a community strategy or develop something especially new, that's something that I love to do, is to try and like ground up start something new and fresh, which is exciting for me. So I would just say look for something that excites you. Like, is this part of my strengths? Does this make me happy? Make sure you've got 75% of that and then maybe 25% of other things in there.
Some things that I would specifically look at is oftentimes they'll put who the role reports to, right? So is this role reporting to the director of community, or is this role reporting to the CMO? Is this role reporting to customer service, right? So I think that tells a lot about the role. Sometimes it tells a lot about how smart or how deep into a community that that organization is. It may be like, I don't know, so we're gonna put you over here. So it's just something to think about. The other thing that I would look for is if it mentions a team. Is it just you out there doing all the things? That may be exactly what you're looking for, or it may be where you're like, nope, I want to be a part of a larger team. And then also looking to see if it's this is an exciting new role. Can often mean we have no idea what the hell we're doing. So looking for some of that verbiage around, pulling those out and not just thinking like, I'm a community manager and I'm going to find all jobs community. Like, really focus on the things that you care about, and if you need to, ask questions, right? Like, what does this mean, a new role? Are there definitions around what this means and things like that? So kind of digging a little deeper sometimes, and making sure you just understand kind of what's in that role.
I think another thing too that you have to be on the lookout for, and this is something that I fell into at first, there's a big difference between a community manager and a social media manager. And a lot of times this term community manager, it's becoming more popular, which is fantastic. There's more awareness about it in general. But a lot of times social media managers are labeled as community managers, and that's not necessarily the same thing. So like, just be on the lookout for what your actual roles are going to be. Like, if all you're hearing about is posting to Twitter, like, you're not necessarily as much of a community manager. But if you like really have the heart for the community and you want to build that, like, be on the lookout for that, because you can get a job as a community manager and the next thing you know, all you're doing is just scheduling stuff in Hootsuite, and that's all you're doing. So make sure that you have that in line, I would say. Okay. So
sorry, I just wanted to jump in one more thing on that.
Yeah.
I know
you could say 4 more things on it if you want.
it came up earlier too, and things like writing tweets being part of the job, and not every community job involves creating content. Like, if you're working agency side, all the content and everything that's being pushed out is being created by a creative team, or possibly a social media manager if you're client side. A lot of community jobs don't involve creating content at all. It's about creating conversation. So I think that's another thing you can look for when you're looking for a job. Are they talking about content creation, or are they talking about conversation?
Yeah, I think in general, when you're looking at job roles, you should never get hung up on the title. You should always look at the details, at the scope. And if the title really bugs you, sometimes you can have it changed as well. That is possible. I know from being on the other end of creating titles, sometimes it's really hard because you want to be creative, but you don't want to come up with something that people are going to hate either. Depending on what company you're at. But yeah, definitely, like, I've seen a lot of roles where maybe it's labeled as a community manager, but it's actually more just straight content related or more just social media related. And then I've seen other roles that are called like social media manager, and they're actually very like community focused. And so I think to get hung up on the title when you're looking at a job is not as crucial as to look at what the actual responsibilities and scope is.
Perfect. All right, so going to move into question 5, and this is sort of the same question-ish, but what are the warning signs? Like, what are the red flags that you should look out for when you're seeing this, and it's like, oh no, buyer beware, or applicant beware. What should you be wary of?
For me, it's being vague. You know, this topic was kind of my idea because I had a situation a month or so ago where we were working with a client's volunteer community manager, brought on just for one campaign, and you know, in agency, community manager means that you post content and you respond to people. But this community manager was used to working in more of a client-side environment, and so he created a whole bunch of content that didn't really line up with the vision for our campaign. And there was a real discrepancy in what we expected them to do and what they sort of expected themselves to do. And so for me, there's nothing worse than being vague. You have to be really specific, really clear up front what the scope is, what the expectations are, what you want them to do, and then give the community manager a chance to get back to you and say, well, what about things like X, Y, Z that would normally be part of my role, or what community manager role could be, and just get everyone aligned as quickly as you can, because it can be really disastrous when those scopes and what the idea of scope don't line up. So for me, vagueness, that's absolutely the worst thing. Yeah.
I would say one of the warnings for me would be seeing something in a job description like provide support to our community. Like, there should be support folks for that, I think, and I think it's so easy to pile on all of these different tasks like support or social media or even events, right, that are suddenly part of your job when there's a whole lot of different community projects that you'd rather be focusing on. So I would just say, like, are they asking to do support? Are they asking to play a role of a social media manager as well? Like, that's 3 jobs in one, and I would say definitely look out for that.
Yeah, I think to tag along with that, a lot of it also boils down to, you know, how it goes back really to one of the very first questions of, you know, who's defining the role and do they really know what they're defining and what they're doing. I've seen job descriptions for community managers that talk about SEO and PPC, and you're like, no, like, there are people who specialize in that and they would probably be better at it. Now, perhaps in my world, because that's what we do, right? Like, our community is marketers, and so they're marketing, right? So to be a marketer or to be a community manager at Moz, you have to know some of things about marketing. But most other job descriptions, right, if it's community focused and they're asking you to, you know, have in-depth knowledge in paid advertising and things like that, it's one of those, like, wait a minute, what exactly is this role? It may be the perfect role for you because you love that stuff, but it's one of those that just makes you think, right? Like, ask more questions about this particular thing. Why, as a community manager, am I also going to be doing, you know, paid search advertising or whatever the case is? I think a lot of it is being able to advocate for yourself and being able to ask those questions. Oh, and that's the next question. Sorry.
Don't be
No
sorry. It's
problem
a
at
great
all.
transition.
It is a great transition.
And
And
but
we'll
I think
actually,
you're right in there. Oh, I
oh,
was
go
just
ahead.
going to say there is advocating for yourself before you accept the role and advocating for yourself after you accept the role too. So, but
Well, hey, let's talk about one of them. Well, how do you guys, and I know this is something that I imagine has happened to all of us and probably most of the people that have been watching, how do you advocate for yourself when you've been asked to work beyond your role? I know a lot of times in this world it can, you know, you're picking up balls of other people have dropped and all that kind of stuff, but how do you really advocate for yourself when you're really asked to push it outside of what your role is?
I think in terms of time, just like amount of projects on your plate at one time, I will keep like a physical calendar of all of my time slots for the week, and then you can see exactly what I'm working on. And it's like, well, if folks are coming to me with like a ton of projects, I can say, well, this is my calendar for the next like 2 weeks, for example. Like I can take something off and then put this on, right? It's kind of like that boundary of how much can I do at one time, only so much. And I think if folks are able to see what's on your plate currently, that does make a big difference.
I think a lot of it also has to do with prioritization and understanding like what is actually a priority. I mean, we've had times where people, an individual community manager may think that this one thing that they're working on is the most important thing, and they get something else that it's like, okay, we need to work on this, and they're like, no, but I have to work on this one thing. And if they don't understand that that is not necessarily the highest priority to the company, the organization thinks this other thing over here right now is our priority, and I need you to actually like not work on that so we can focus on this thing. So having a good understanding of priorities and making sure that those are communicated up, down, sideways, all of that is really, really huge, because if you don't know what the priorities are, you just kind of make up your own, and you could be spending lots of time working on something. You could be spending your time on things that just aren't as valuable as if you were working on putting your time into something else. And so understanding and knowing those priorities are a good way to help you to advocate for that. Because if someone comes to you and says, why are you spending so much time on this thing? And you say, well, based on the company priorities, I know this is the number one thing, or whatever. Maybe you won't say it quite like that, but
Yeah, I think that goes back to business objectives and making sure that any work you do is always really in line with the objectives for the business. And sometimes, especially if you're working agency, you'll have two sets of business objectives. You'll have your agency's business objectives, and then you'll have your client's business objectives. And you have to sort of balance that out. So which client currently takes priority, which project for said those clients takes priority, how do they all line up? Sometimes that'll be you setting those priorities, sometimes it'll be your boss. And I think if you want to stretch yourself and grow within your role and grow within your company, one of the best ways to advocate for yourself is to show that you have a really good handle on what those business objectives are. You show that you're clear on them, you show that you're responsible with prioritizing your time accordingly, and that you're always able to relate your work back to making things happen. And if there's something you want to add to your job down the line, a new responsibility you'd like to take on, a role you'd like to grow into, if you're always really clear on how everything can help the business, your boss is going to be more likely to listen to you, and you go up to them and say, hey, I have this idea. If I could take on doing XYZ, I think it would really help this client out with achieving this goal. You've got a much better shot at growing that way.
Ooh, for sure. I love that. The idea of saying, if I do these things, I will get this outcome, which will help this client, or which will help, us grow members, whatever the case is, rather than saying, ooh, I think it'd be really neat to do this because we could get a lot of engagement or something. You're like, right? But if you can point to what those objectives are and how they roll back up to your team's goals, your overall company goals, whatever the case is, it's a lot easier for you to make your way when you can talk in that talk, right? Because the higher ups will be like, oh, I see how that can help.
And if you're playing CMGR Hangout drinking game, make sure you take a shot because we heard Zed again. So we've got that. Don't stick your tongue out at me. I can still see that. Anyway, we are going to bounce over and we're going to pull in some questions now because you guys have been so kind to send some questions in. Let's pull up the one and only Patrick Helen first. Patrick says, how about the opposite of scope? How hard is it to unpack what you currently do to update your various resumes. What you guys think about that? Patrick, you've rendered them speechless.
Well, I think resumes aren't really about scope. They're marketing documents. They're about what make you excellent in the role, whereas someone who's mediocre in the role wouldn't have done that. So it's not so much about what you do so much as how you do it. So, did you win an award on the work? Were you recognized internally in the office? Did you get a promotion? Did your campaign lead to growing sales? It's not so much about the scope of your role so much as why you rocked in it more than the next person.
I will say, though, if you're looking at a job description, it helps to modify your resume to that description when you're applying for it. From being on the other end of it, I know that those are the things that I have front of mind when I'm looking at resumes and want to know, like, is this person able to, like, touch on these things? And so it does help to make sure that you have addressed a lot of their key concerns within it. But you're right that it is marketing yourself and standing out in a pile, probably a gigantic pile of resumes that someone is going cross-eyed looking at.
All right, Dom, maybe you should unmute your microphone before you pull up a tweet so you can intro said tweet. Our good friends at Tracker have been killing it in the chat today, so thanks for joining. What are the best practices for CS and CMGR to function seamlessly together seamlessly? This is just a good question. Go, Jen, go.
Communication. That sounds so dumb and like duh, right? But if the two teams aren't talking to each other and on top of things and saying back and forth like what's happening and knowing what's going on, like you're screwed. We use Slack for absolutely everything. We have a Slack channel that we get a question that's more of like, let's say through Twitter we get a customer service type question and we're not quite sure how to answer because they're the experts in these things, so we jump over and ask them, and we keep each other updated all the time on new things that are happening in the community, new things that are happening on, we call it the help team. So having constant communication and like the team leaders have ongoing meetings of just like, this is what's happening, okay, here's what's going on here, and somebody needs help with this, my team helps their team, etc. So it's just a lot of like not being completely separate entities and figuring out how to work together.
The best model I've seen was when I was working on some craft brands a couple of years ago. I was the community manager, and when something came up that required customer service input, I would actually flip the post or the tweet right over to them, and they would answer it themselves. A lot of times, it's nice to have a consistent voice, consistent person, especially if you've got a personality associated with your brand. Like, people in the Magento community know Sherry, but a lot of times you're just posting as the brand itself. And as long as, community service, the community knows the voice of the brand and the customer service team is able to speak from that voice, I think it often makes a lot of sense to just put them in touch directly rather than almost setting the community manager up as a middleman and a go-between. I found that model to be really effective, to just let customer service know, hey, we need your input here, go, and let them take over.
To kind of piggyback off what Jen said earlier, we also use Slack here at Wistia, and it's been amazing to just communicate like what things are you hearing folks have problems about, or what in the community are people talking about that they might be confused about. We also sit right next to each other, which sounds like, oh, why does it even matter? But it does actually increase the flow of conversation between us, which really helps talk about issues and just get on the same page in general. And also just weekly lunches, sit together, chat about what's going on, so you're on the same page is super helpful for us.
We also sit next to our help team. and we have like couches like in between. We are like on the corners, and we sit in these couches. Anyway, Dom, you should come by and check out our area sometime.
I will. I'm not there right now, but I will when I get back to Boston. But yeah, this has been great. We got a couple more questions. So if you guys have some questions, we have like one more that we have to ask, and then we've got a couple more of these, so fire away. Thanks again to everybody that's listening. Really glad to have some people. I know some people are writing while they're listening, tweeting along, so what up to the world. Let me share this, because I'm not sharing my screen yet, so you guys don't know what I'm about to pull up. And there you go. What would you say, well, would you say that having a social media crisis management plan is the community manager's role, the company's role, or is that both? So whose scope does that really fall into? What do you guys think?
I would say that it usually starts with the community manager to flag a crisis, but I really think when there's a crisis, it needs to be all hands on deck. For example, when the shootings happened in Paris, our community manager was very sick. And the second I saw that, I got on the phone with everyone immediately and started, putting plans into action to take all posts down, all promoted posts for the 3 days of mourning. You don't want to be insensitive. You don't want to be, you don't want to be a jerk. So just getting everything rolling. And then account teams are jumping in and pitching in. And I really just think as soon as there's some sort of a crisis, it's really all hands on deck. Now, if it's the other kind of crisis where, your brand has screwed up in some way, it's going to be the community manager flagging the problem, but you're probably going to need someone who's fairly high up the food chain, especially if they have a PR role or PR background, to really get in there and sort of manage the situation from that angle.
I agree with you on that a lot, that it's the flagging. I think that the plan, at least for us, like we work with some bigger brands, and we've helped them sort of formulate situation by situation what sort of the plan or what our recommendations would be. I think ultimately, like, the scope of it itself really does fall within the company more, just because they kind of had the final say in that. Typically, that's the way that it works. But being on the front lines, as you typically are if you're a social media manager, or your community manager just working within the social sphere, you can sort of sense how your community is reacting to certain things. They might not have as volatile of a reaction to one thing as they do to another. And you are, like what Emma was saying earlier, you're the advocate of them back to the company. So, you are the one that gets to take on that persona and be like, if you were to say this is sort of the way that this could be the way that it's going to go, because it reminds me of, all the other times that have happened, X, Y, and Z. So, there's a lot of things there. So, do you guys have any other input on that? Okay, no. So let's bring in another question, shall we? This one is from Janet. Thanks, Janet, for sending in a question. And more questions coming in. You guys are baller. Do you try to educate prospective employers about CMGR roles and what they shouldn't entail? This is fun. Do you basically go to your employer and go, nah, it's not really me?
So I have done that in the past at a previous role, just because I think, especially if it's the first community manager that company has had, and you want them to do all of these things, I have had to be like, you know what, support just isn't something that I should be doing. I think there are people that can be a lot better than me at this. I think that this is already its own full-time job. I think that sometimes, for the success of the company and for the success of yourself in that role, you have to advocate and say, this is not the place that I should be in, and someone else should come in and take this, and it'll help our company grow.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth having a conversation about what a job should not entail. Dom mentioned earlier about how a lot of employers get confused about the difference between a community manager and a social media manager. So I think that's a time when you would want to say, I don't know if it really makes sense for me to take on that responsibility. I know for me, the time, my job really didn't work out because it was a brand new position. I'm a strategist. Like, I'm a numbers person. I'm data driven. What they really wanted was someone who could, spin more PR stories. That's not my skill set. I wish that was a conversation that I'd had with them. I think it would have, not put me into a job where I wasn't set up for success, because I'm not a PR person. So I think there are a lot of times it makes sense to have a conversation with your employer and just be like, I don't know that this makes sense here.
I'm a big fan of being straight up and talking about those things up front so that you don't get into a role and at some point you're like, wait, so I think I'm supposed to be doing this, but I don't really know because no one's really said anything, right? I think we've all been at that place, but at this point in my life, it's like, no, I'm going to know right up front. Is this what you mean? Is this what you want? That is probably not the best thing, right? So just being upfront and actually having just a grown-up conversation about what things mean and what they don't, it will be really, really helpful for you so that you're not wondering what the heck you're supposed to be doing or, how you're being measured or any of those things.
Muy bueno, muy bueno. Let's bring in, we have a couple more questions, so I'm going to try to fire off as many of these as we can, guys. We have a question coming in from Craig. What's up, Craig? Thanks for joining. Does a CMGR role typically include growing the community or mainly nurturing existing community? What do you guys think about that?
It depends on the community role. Most roles that I've been in, community has been more about retention, and the social media strategy and creative has really been more about acquisition. But there are so many community roles that do involve customer acquisition, and that's where you get into generally more of the more senior positions where it's about influencer outreach and but a lot of times it's more about the retention aspect.
I agree. It totally depends. A little bit of everything, depending on what the needs are of the organization. If there's somebody else already doing one aspect and not the other, and all that. It's not a black or white.
There's also a difference between growing a community and growing a platform too. Like, our community is ginormous, but we restarted our forums last year, and so growing awareness of the forums being back and everything and the membership and activity on there is definitely a part of my job. But actually growing the community at large, it's huge and naturally grows itself at this point. So that's not as much of a focus.
Okay. I'm actually going to ask our 7th question before I throw out a couple of more, which keep them firing away, guys. How do you really advocate for yourself when you want to grow beyond your role? Okay, so let's say you had the scope, you had it set there. How do you really advocate to be like, all right, I'd like a little more, please? Insert Oliver Twist here.
So for me, as someone who does manage a team, what I look for is I want you to show that you already have an interest in that thing. I'm not the kind of manager that's like, okay, and now I'm going to give you this, right? If you say, here, I have this great idea, and it will bring this, this, and this outcome, I'm going to say, make it so. Like, go for it, do it. And once that you've essentially shown, not that you have to completely prove and like for a year you're getting paid less because you're not doing all the things, but having that like, this is a thing that I want to do and I want to grow into and I'm going to start doing it. is shows me a lot. Like on the team, I can say, oh, right, so they're really focused on this, and they have these goals, and this is what the outcome is going to be. This is what they want the outcome to be, and they've already started implementing it and doing it. So then we can talk about, okay, so in our next 6-month discussion with the whole team, so-and-so is looking to expand their role into this, and this is how we're going to help them. And we'll do that as a team and talk about, so even though I may have these conversations one-on-one with the team, we or one-on-one with the individual team members, we'll also talk about it as a team, and everybody is like, yeah, so-and-so's really been taking on these extra things. I'd love to see her, be the backup for this particular aspect, or whatever, and it really creates that team environment where everybody's sort of helping.
I'm gonna echo what we've talked about before in the vein of communication. I think that's huge. I just recently actually at my company increased my scope and took on a project management role for a client, and it started with me saying, hey, I'm interested, and saying what do I have to do to sort of be able to work my way up to there, or what needs to happen. And so, it started with shadowing, it started with little bits by little bits, and then, sort of gets there. So, if there's something you're interested in, I mean, you have to advocate for yourself there. And you can't be afraid that someone's going to say no, because if they constantly say no, like, there are other community jobs out there where you will have the opportunity to grow. Like, it's not necessarily a industry now where you're like, oh, this is the one job, I better hold on to it because there's there's nothing else out there. Like, find something that makes you feel comfortable in a company that actually wants to help you grow. Don't be afraid to transition, because I know it, 3 people, 4 people, including myself, the first time that I met them on this panel, they worked for a different company than what they work for now. So, it's there's a lot of, you can definitely increase your scope a lot in there. So, okay, let's see. Let's bring in another question. We actually have a 2-parter from Janet. So I'm just going to fire it off, and then you guys can go with it. She was recently told by a recruiter that they got a quote-unquote superstar for less than industry rate. So here's part 1. Is that becoming more common? And then the second, how do you define the industry standard for scoping community for a CMGR salary? Oh, this is a deep question. This is really interesting. Does anybody want to talk about dollars?
Community Roundtable survey. They do a great survey on CMGR job salaries. It also makes a difference where you're living, and you can do some research on that too. But that's always a good thing to refer to, because they get so many community managers involved. And the more you really advocate for what you're worth, the more you're helping the entire industry. If you continue to accept low-paying gigs, you're actually hurting the whole industry, not just yourself.
And again, back to, there's a wide range of levels of a community manager. So if you're taking an entry-level community manager job at an agency, that's really different from being head of community at a larger company. So yeah, just there's going to be a wide range of pay as well.
Okay, well, on that money note,
I would also say,
oh.
I would actually also say on that if someone tells you they got a superstar, like, just be glad and walk away, because that's a really weird thing for them to tell you.
Dude, I totally got a superstar, man. It was awesome, bruh. But yeah, so thanks so much, you guys. This was absolutely fantastic. If you guys have any ideas for any topics, anything you want to be a part of, just go to mycmgr.com, click on participate. Bruce, Sherry, and myself get a email, and this was from the wonderful brain of Emma. So if you guys have something, fire away, and we can definitely get it on there. Yep, a big old booyah from the side chat here. Just wanted to remind everybody to check out cmad.co, not .com, .co. and look at everything that we've got going on there. The panels are all getting filled up. The awards are there, and they are live for nominations. You can nominate more than one person if you want to. Really fill those out. I've had a lot of fun reading through the nominations so far. And then Sherry, what do we have coming up next week?
We don't have a topic next week, so refer to that sheet Tom gave you and let us know what you want to talk about at mycmjr.com/participate.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.